Thank you very much, and thank all the speakers have been really quite interesting, informative, and they certainly have been provocative. I was going to start a certain way, but I'm going to change my path. I do want to make sure that we leave the proper time for audience participation. But I've decided that I'm going to start with my questions. I'm going to ask Todd Stern my initial questions, mainly because his hair cut is so much better than Podesta's. With that, I want to just say a couple of things about what was said here with regard to nationally determined contributions. As you know, the way those were put in by most countries, they were contingent obligations that they made, and they were contingent about getting massive, quite substantial financial assistance from the rich part of the world. There's no evidence that that is going to happen. And absent that happening, I think the conversations in 2021 will not be too good. I also will point out that the United States itself isn't going to meet their national determined contribution for 2020, basically because we've had a stronger economy than was developed. So I think that there's the scientific community, a lot of energy experts, or I should say environmental or climate experts, have had a different lesson from Paris. And that lesson is that emission reductions alone are not going to bring you anywhere near to 2 degrees. And that in fact you have to start thinking about negative emission reductions in order to compensate for what can't be done by getting all the way to zero on emissions. So the negative emission reduction path is important for the globe, but it also speaks to the importance that Chairman Castor said about innovation. So I leave with that. And finally, if China doesn't act properly in the next decade with respect to automobiles, even though they're doing a lot in electric cars, they still have a lot more automobiles out there, coal, uh, the game's up in 2030. In 2030, you'll know what the possibilities are with respect to China. So I'd like to have your reaction to that, that really Paris really questions nationally determined contributions.
So thanks, John. A few comments. There's nothing in Paris that acknowledges the notion that NDCs, nationally determined contributions, can be contingent. That's not. There was no deal to that effect at all, and indeed there were considerable efforts made to avoid that. Now, it may well be that countries, when they put if they want to put in their NDCs, they make some reference to an article from the original Framework Convention that is routinely misinterpreted by developing countries to suggest a contingency, which actually isn't even in there. But so I just don't agree with you on the notion that they are legitimately contingent.
Todd, doesn't the United Nations Environmental Program report annually, in a quite good report, how countries are doing with respect to their contributions, their nationally determined contributions?
Yes, and I'm not arguing that we're on track or that countries are doing well. I'm taking issue with your claim that Paris gave countries carte blanche to put in contingent targets.
You know that much better than I do, but the UN environmental program does record it that way.
Yeah, well, that may be. I mean, but that
Okay.
there's nothing in Paris that is supportive of that. Look, I think that, let me just ask you one question. When you say negative emissions, are you talking about carbon capture, or are you talking about geoengineering, or both?
Well, first of all, I don't want to get this emotional, and Maria Zuber isn't here to defend me, but I will say that I think when I'm talking about negative emissions, it's removing carbon from the atmosphere, finding alternative ways of sucking up carbon from the air, whether it's through agricultural practices or the other. So it's really carbon removal.
Yeah, well, look, carbon removal in various ways is certainly going to be part of the equation. I mean, there's no way for it not to be part of the equation. But it's also, it also can't be the equation. I mean, unless there are dramatic steps of the kind that Chair Castor has talked about, of the kind that John talked about, we can't get where we need to without those kinds of steps, and we will probably still need, you certainly all of the sequestration that you can get
That's
through
exactly.
natural solutions. That's completely great. And CCS is, I mean, it has not quite taken off yet, but I expect it to be part of the equation. Also, geoengineering is a sort of different deal, which we're not really talking about here yet. And on China, I agree that China, that's why I said what I said before, that it's good that we've got a long-term goal, and the Chinese do tend to take their goals seriously. So that's not nothing. That's actually not nothing at all. But if they sit back and let the thing flatline in the 2020s, it will not be good.
John, may I ask you a question, sir?
Go ahead.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Uh, do you really think that net zero for the United States by 2050 is a realistic goal? Or do you think it's kind of an important goal?
Well, I think it's a critical goal, and I think we can get there. And just to put a little flesh on the previous discussion, the National Academy study suggested that we need to take 9 gigatons of carbon out of the atmosphere
Right,
globally by
right.
2050, 1 gigaton in the US through natural means, about 50%, carbon removal, about 50%. That's a tall challenge. I'm not saying this is easy, but the catastrophe that Todd began to go through on collapse of water systems, food systems, human security, uh, the uh, the fact that we have no regime for managing climate refugees, internally displaced people, failed states, uh, is would make you want to go to the goal that we need to go to. And so I don't ask myself, is it realistic? I ask myself, is it critical and necessary? And the answer to that is yes.
Well, that does reach a very sharp difference between you and me. I don't disagree with you about the dangers here, all the way from conflict, all the way to what will happen to exposed communities and to poor people from climate damage globally. That's not the issue. The issue is when you mount a program, can you realistically talk to the American people and say this is going to work?
And the answer to that is yes. And I think that, I tried to go through sector by sector what that looks like. And the difference between the US and China, or the difference between China and Biden, maybe that's a better way to think about it, is Biden is trying to, as I said, decarbonize the power sector and then basically power everything with clean electricity. In
John,
China, they're trying to electrify everything and then get around to decarbonizing the power sector. And I think we need to reverse that, or we need to put pressure on them to reverse that.
they need to reverse it.
But there's no technical reason why we can't do that, John. The question is whether we have the financing and the will to to get on with the project.
John,
It was hard to beat the Nazis, but we did it. And I think this idea that we should sort of say, well, can we tell the American people? The short answer is yes, we can. And it'll create tremendous innovation, millions of jobs, new businesses, and put people to work in a more just economy.
he's not listening to me. You're not listening to me. Look, John, one other question, then we'll let you go, or you let me go. And that is, do you think that we can do that in the United States without more use of nuclear power, or some use of nuclear power, since that's going away?
I think that I'm of the view that keeping the existing fleet, as long as it's safe, online is going to end up being important, because if you take it offline prematurely, you're going to replace that with mostly with gas, which is going to be hard to get rid of.
But why don't you?
So,
You're reluctant.
in terms of advanced nuclear, You know,
No.
you and I have sat on 7 studies about whether you can pencil that out.
Right.
Renewables and storage are probably going to be a cheaper, in the United States, are going to be a cheaper solution. And whether that's true in China, whether that's true in other parts of the world where labor's cheaper, where there's less regulatory risk, maybe there's a future for some nuclear in India and China. But I think in the United States, there's, you know, I'm not against research, and MIT is probably doing plenty of it. But the question is it cost effective as opposed to renewables plus storage? And I think the answer going to be is that it's going to come up short. And just look at Vogel in Georgia, and ask Paul that question. Maybe he has a view about that.
Well, except
I think the chair should get back in on this.
Chair Kastner, I want to say that you touched on one point which I am absolutely in agreement on, and that is you said this is an all of government effort, and you have to look at places in the past history where the nation has really taken on the challenge in a serious way. And I forget which particular example you used, but I am taken by the unfortunate words which were used by the president that I served in the Department of Energy, Jimmy Carter, when he said that the energy problem is the moral equivalent of war. And I actually do believe that this climate issue is the moral equivalent of war. And to me, I want to just underscore that you're saying that really this resonates with me. If the country can't organize itself in an entirely different way, I think there's going to be trouble here, and all these little program issues, in my mind, just go a lot lower compared to the issue, are we going to reorganize to get serious about this? And there are only two, and you know, I do, unlike everybody else here, I remember a little bit about the Second World War. My father worked in the War Production Board during the Second World War. But my point is, unless you do something like that to reorganize, we're not going to get there. And you, Chairman Castor, I ask you, what are the chances that Congress would consider a serious reorganization to address climate change? Redo the committee structure, both the House and the Senate, perhaps have a single joint committee, as there was in the Second World War, to really address climate. I think that if we don't have changes of that magnitude in Congress, we are going to be in trouble trying to get the executive branch trying to get programs here. After you've answered that, I'm going to ask John Podesta how he's going to reorganize the executive branch. But first, I'd like to hear your views on that.
Well, public sentiment will push the Congress to do some things. I do not foresee a wholesale reorganization of the Congress. I don't think that's necessary. But the executive branch, the leadership of President Biden, his entire administration, from every department, ag, defense, and the Department of Energy in particular, is in need of a revamp to meet this challenge, and that will the executive branch can do. The president can do some of that on his own, but it will be vital for the Congress to follow through with the investments. That's really what I see as the key from the Congress, providing those investments across the entire enterprise. That's much more important than simply reorganizing congressional committees. And I think you have hit on something. This is, I think the American people now are awake to the fact that inaction is very costly, that they're also awake to the fact that we have a moral obligation to future generations to solve this now. We're fortunate, even though the federal government has slipped on the goals under the Paris Agreement, our NDCs. We've had a lot of states and local communities that have taken up the mantle. We've had a lot of businesses now, even electric utilities, automakers now that understand the challenge before us. And now we have an opportunity with the President Biden and his leadership and all of the smart talented folks all across this great country to meet this moment. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
And you believe that President-elect Biden's $1.7 trillion federal investment package for climate is a chance of getting appropriated by the Congress, given all the other problems we have with budgets? You think that's possible, that 1.7 trillion over 4 years?
I don't know the exact price tag, but it's significant, and we will have to rebuild our economy coming out of the COVID pandemic. And we have technological tools at our disposal that we've never had before, whether it's in climate smart agriculture or simply using your cell phone to control your thermostat. That might be something that a lot of your folks use every day, but for the vast majority of Americans, they haven't been given those simple tools at their disposal to help them put money back into their pockets. They haven't had the opportunity to drive one of those fun electric vehicles. The charging infrastructure isn't there. The models aren't out yet, but they're going to be hungry for it, not to have to stop at the gas station or get your oil change constantly. These are the kind of very significant changes that are already underway. And with a little bit of federal leadership now, we can push those further and faster to the benefit of working people everywhere.
Thank you so much, Chairman Castor. I think that we have time. We've used up the time that we have available. I'd like to ask Paul Joskow to take over now and to curate the questions which come in and address them to the panels as he sees fit. Paul, please.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Todd and John and Representative Castor. Those were excellent presentations and really quite interesting. We have a number of questions that have come in, and I'm going to try to group them. We have a number of questions go to the following issue: that the country, the U.S., is severely divided on many dimensions. How are we going to develop a broad consensus among the population that climate change should be high up on the list when there are other issues that are facing the country, whether it's COVID or the economy or healthcare? What do you see as the challenges, and how are we going to do it? And I'll let all three of you chip in.
Well, I'll start. If you look at public opinion surveys now, clean energy there's not a great partisan divide there. In fact, vast majority of Americans understand that clean energy means more cost-effective energy. It's going to be cleaner, helps clean the air that we breathe in the middle of a COVID pandemic that attacks your respiratory system. They understand that. I think we have to work on ensuring that this really is an initiative that lifts working people. And a lot of folks there's some people who are wary of that right now. They have a good paying job in fossil fuels or pipelines. You can't change this overnight. You have to invest in those communities, let them self-determine what the future will be. I mean, it's just natural that they want a good paying job, and they want a good paying job for their kids. And that's the kind of communication you have to undertake. And it's a lot of hard work. It's not simple.
John?
Yeah, I think what's really changed in the climate space with respect to public opinion is that it is a much more salient issue for a larger swath of the electorate. Clean energy solutions have always been popular, but they were always 20th on the list of 21 items. I think what we saw in the primaries and going into the general election is that there's quite a bit of that amongst Democratic voters. It's gone very far up the list of saliency, equivalent to healthcare. Amongst the independent voters, and particularly kind of swing voters in the suburbs, being a climate denier hurts you, it doesn't help you. And being for these solutions is a politically beneficial question. But I come back, and I think I'm echoing something the chair said, which is, what was Biden and Harris's strategy? is to link these questions together of building a more just and equitable economy, tackling environmental justice, building a clean future, putting people to work doing that in family sustaining jobs. That is a message that I think can't just be implemented through policy. You have to keep that story alive. And the White House has can never forget they have to constantly communicate with the American people about what they're doing and why John's cynicism should not win out, that it can't be done, but that it can be done, and that people will have, create wealth, create jobs, create opportunity if we have a kind of an all of government strategy that's working with the private sector to produce those results.
Todd, let me ask you a slightly different variation on that question.
All right.
How do we rebuild confidence in the international community that the U.S. will stick to its commitments going forward? And this isn't going to be a situation in which we go from one presidential administration to another, and our relationships with the international community and our commitment to global solutions to climate change bounce up and down.
Yeah, well, that's the super difficult one. There's not that much of an answer. I think that what we have to do to begin with is to build up our credibility right away in this administration. So you've got to show you're not just talking the talk, but walking the walk with a full domestic program that Chair Castor and John were talking about. I think that to the extent that we can have some of what we do be legislative, I mean, if we were actually to hit the jackpot and get both of those Senate seats in Georgia, that would be fantastic. If we can't, if we even get one, and then all we need is Romney in order to be able to get a powerful reconciliation bill, that would also be positive. But the more that other countries see us able to do something, some significant things legislatively, the better it is, because they at this point, they wish this were not true, but they at this point are schooled enough on sort of U.S. Government political system that they know that if you get something through Congress, that's a lot more meaningful than if you can only do it through executive action. If all we can do is executive, then obviously we will. But I think that there will inevitably be a reconciliation piece of this package that'll be important. But the really giving sort of any kind of full reassurance, you're not going to give it, right? I mean, from the point of view of the international community, they saw, I mean, very different circumstances, but from their point of view, the U.S. walked out on an agreement before this, all the way back in 2000 on Kyoto, when President Bush came in. Now the U.S. was a central player in the whole 7 years taking us up to the Paris Agreement, and you see, and lots of the Paris architecture is in response to where the U.S. was pushing, and then as soon as Paris is done, the U.S. walks out. So you can't completely allay those concerns, which is why I said it very early on. The international community is eager to see us coming back, and they will continue to be wary. And all we can do is do our best with them.
Thank you. I'm going to direct this to John Podesta because he was there. I remember well the Waxman-Markey bill, and passed the House. It was discussed for a long time, but it lost in the Senate at a time when my recollection is the Democrats had a majority. And I'm just wondering,
A big majority.
from the questions here, how do we get anything through the Senate, even if the Democrats get the 2 Georgia seats?
Well, I think on the investment side, and sort of alluded to this, if you have the control of the majority, you still have, there are conservatives, there are people who are not going to want to go as fast and as far, perhaps, in the Democratic caucus. But you have the vehicle of what's called budget reconciliation, which means that at least on the investment side and these appropriated accounts, you can make tremendous progress with a simple majority in the Senate. that means solidarity. But I lived that experience in 1993. I was working, Todd and I were both working in the White House for President Clinton when we passed the Clinton economic plan that passed by one vote in the House, and Gore broke the tie in the Senate through this reconciliation vehicle, and it stimulated the longest period of job growth and wealth creation that we'd seen post World War II. So it can happen. The other question people ask is, yeah, but is it stable? Will the next administration come in and reverse it? And I think, again, the Affordable Care Act is actually a lesson in once things get going and people like what they're seeing and those businesses are created and the air is cleaner and asthma is reduced and people are going to work doing important work, it gets to be harder to reverse the trend lines. Most of this is going to happen in the private sector. The question is, how does the federal government stimulate that level of change, investment, and innovation? And I think they got a lot of tools to do it, but you need a strategy and you need accountability. And to John's point, that means it's got to be White House led, and it's got to be accountable to a White House structure. And there's sort of disputes about what the best version of that is, but you can't let it get too far away from presidential leadership.
Thank you, John. I have a question for Representative Castor. You mentioned the role of the states over the last few years in pushing forward with initiatives to mitigate carbon emissions, in some cases to stimulate adaptation. What do you see going forward as the mix of federal and state activities in this area and responsibilities? I know the New England, all but one of the New England states has a very, very aggressive carbon mitigation goal, at least for the electric power sector. California has it for the entire economy. A number of other states have established goals as well. Can we build on what's happened in the last several years at the federal level and reinforce it? How do you see that emerging?
Yes, there's no substitute for federal leadership. For example, that's great what's happening in New England and in California, that you've created a lot of jobs in the clean energy sector. I come from the so-called Sunshine State, where we generate very little power from renewable sources, especially solar. We have great potential in solar, but states like Georgia and New Jersey and North Carolina, I believe, generate more power from solar energy. That's why the federal overarching plan is vitally important. Do we continue investing in renewable tax credits? We absolutely should. It's going to save us money down the road. Do we, just what John Podesta said on the private sector being a very important partner. Our automakers have made very ambitious announcements recently about what they're going to do on batteries and electric vehicles. The federal government can help expedite those changes by doing something like a cash for clunkers that worked in the past, and helping them set up supply chains, investing in workforce. The same goes for our electric utilities. They are oftentimes mandated to consider what they've invested and not lose those investments over time. If we can help them with modernization of the grid and the move towards renewable power through certain tax credits and, again, workforce investments, that will help speed those things along. So I think that's going to be what you'll see right off the bat.
Thank you. Todd, I have a question here. What do you see as the priorities for engaging and assisting both financially and softer support on regulatory reform and other policy changes in the developing countries?
Well, I think, sort of as I was saying, with respect to finance, this has been a kind of a critical issue, and without nearly as much progress as people would have liked to have seen over the years. And I think that the more intensive engagement of the international financial institutions is going to be very, very welcome. I think that there are means of acting, particularly if we can put the U.S. together with the EU and others to mobilize the right kind of support mechanisms. Again, the sorts of things like loan guarantees and 10 other things that can open the door to that can make the calculus between risk and reward work for private investment. I think all of that will be very important. I think it's one of the unfortunate kind of overly politicized qualities of the UNFCCC, the climate negotiating body, that the idea of when we used to try to talk about improving the enabling environments of developing countries, they would tend to hear that as the developed countries just trying to throw the problem on their lap, just trying to get out of our responsibility, which actually isn't true at all. I mean, the thing that is always critical is if the country where you're trying to attract investment looks like a reasonably safe, reasonably inviting place for investors to go. So I would hope that one of the things that we could do is again, working with the EU and others, try to build a relationship where assistance to relevant developing countries, and whether it's coming from on a bilateral basis or some group of countries or through the World Bank or others, where they can get their regulatory and enabling environments good enough that they become magnets for capital rather than the opposite. I think that's where the work on regulatory issues, to me, is going to be the most important in those countries.
Oh, can I add one word to that?
Yes, sure, John.
I think the United States participation in the International Solar Alliance, which is India-based, India-French built, led, would be, and whose focus is on essentially spreading solar, not just around the globe, but particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, would be a good step that the new administration could take. And I think both the alliance, which is a multinational organization, and India, which kind of leads it, would welcome that.
Thank you, John. Well, I have a question. It must come from an economist here. What do you all, and I'll let each of you answer, what do you all think about pricing carbon emissions? And I'll interpret the question broadly. It could be a carbon emissions tax. It could be a cap and trade system as they have in the EU. How do you see that as one major policy instrument to provide incentives to mitigate carbon emissions? Why don't we start with Representative Castor?
Well, in our Solving the Climate Crisis action plan, we recommend that, yes, we should put a price on carbon, but recognizing, as John Podesta said earlier, it is not a silver bullet. You have to have a suite of policies, use every tool in the toolbox. What is developed over time on cap and trade, some parts of the country, like the Mid-Atlantic, they have a trading system. California is going to join in with parts of Canada. So we said the Congress still has some homework to do on whether you actually approve a carbon tax or you build upon the trading systems that are out there. But it simply isn't a silver bullet. And now we'll have a lot of expertise coming in to the Biden administration that can work hand in hand with us and the business community to chart the course forward. But make no mistake about it, people are awake. Working people understand that they are bearing the cost of fossil fuels and carbon pollution in their property insurance, their flood insurance, disaster aid bills. The costs are escalating to such a point that they want relief. They want to see what the policy prescriptions are for sure.
Paul, I want to step in here with a comment, which
Okay.
is important to your remark.
I can't mute you, so you get to talk.
But I can I think that we want to mention here the work of our colleague Chris Knittel, who points out quite properly that if you have a carbon charge, depending upon how that revenue is used, it can benefit or not benefit poor people in different parts of the country. And so, for example, the proposal of our friend George Schultz actually leads to a transfer of money from poor people to rich people, and worse than that, a transfer of money from the central part of the United States to the coasts. So depending upon the structure of the charge and how the revenue is used, you have a much different effect on communities and social effects.
You'll
John,
also, there's a,
your experience with Waxman Markey, do you still have a fondness for cap and trade?
me?
Yeah.
No. Too complicated, too hard to understand. I think that, it's good to price the externality because people are dumping pollution into the atmosphere and they're not paying for it. So you get more of it. But I think it's now, in addition to what John said about the economics with respect to how you're distributing whatever fee you're collecting, there's another thing that you have to keep your eye on, which is it tends to push other criteria pollutants into communities that are already bearing the brunt of pollution. So the easiest to get, if you impose a carbon fee with no other concern, the easiest reductions you get tend to go to communities that are also more pollution free, and pollution then gets concentrated in communities of color, frontline, fence line communities. So that's another problem. But I think that the biggest problem is that what people on the Hill are talking about is a $15, $25 price on carbon. $100 a ton price raises fuel prices by 70 cents. And we need to do more work to just get on with the process of moving transportation to electrification than assuming that a $15 carbon tax is going to actually do a lot of work for you there. And then when you get to steel and cement and these other, air transport, marine transport, you can't politically imagine a fee that's going to get you the technology shift that's necessary on a 30-year time frame. So I think it could be a complementary policy, particularly in the power sector, but it's not the backbone of a transformational regime.
Todd, there was talk about an international trading program where, especially developing countries, where arguably emissions reductions were relatively inexpensive, would proceed, and it would be paid for by developed countries, which would get credit in some sense along the path to zero. Is that still?
Todd might speak to that because that's kind of the Kyoto structure, I think.
Right.
Yeah. So that was a structure that plausibly made sense at a point when developing countries didn't have their own targets. It can still be, there's still provisions for market mechanisms. I forget exactly what the buzzword is in Paris, but there's provisions for that. You just have to be super careful about double counting because I vividly remember a meeting a number of years ago in a big developing country, who shall remain nameless at the moment, where they were talking about what they wanted to do, and I said, but that's fine. You understand when you sell those credits, you can't count that. And they looked at me blankly, like, why can't. What do you mean? Why couldn't we? It's like, right, that's our problem. So there is that, but most importantly, I think that I really completely agree with what John said on the fact that this just can't carry. It can do a little. It can't carry the water for the most part. And countries, it may be possible to have country trading systems, and again, as long as there's no double counting, that might be okay. But it's just absolutely imperative that countries do what they need to do in their economies to get to zero carbon, not to just buy credits from somebody else.
I think that's an issue with the RECs in the US as well. But John, you wanted to comment on that?
No, I'm good.
Okay, good. I have one final question before we wrap up. It's come in a number of different ways. What should MIT be doing? And let me expand that. What should research universities be doing going forward to contribute through scholarship, through education, through dissemination of our research, to facilitate the changes that we're looking for on the carbon front? John?
All right, I'll take a whack at that, and then I want you to answer my question about nuclear versus storage versus renewables and storage. But look, I think there's the technology push is coming from research universities, but it shouldn't just be focused on sort of high-tech solutions. But I think, for example, the Tata Center at MIT focuses on some low-tech solutions that are particularly relevant to India in the work in both agriculture, fishing, and other places. I think there's a very important role that you play, Paul. I'm not just patting you on the back, but trying to really understand how these technologies get out of the lab and get deployed, and what the economics are, and what the little nudges are, is important work. And then I think there is the important educational aspect of trying to not just educate the public directly through forums like this, but the dissemination of talent and information of the people that are going to school there and that you're training, and that will be the leaders in the global effort at this, provide an important integration of both social science, economics, and the physical sciences.
You want me to answer your question about your point about nuclear?
Yeah.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, the costs of wind and solar and storage are falling so fast that unless someone can come up with a nuclear technology that's a whole lot cheaper than and safer than what we've got, it's I don't think it's going anywhere. At least in in developed countries. The Chinese are building nuclear power plants, and they build them more cheaply than here. We'll see. They build them safely. The Russians are. The Indians are doing some. But it really is stunning how the dramatic reduction in costs, really even absent any policy, would lead to substantial reduction in carbon emissions in the electric power sector. So I agree with you 100%.
Well, we have a real problem in many states where the business model is completely outdated, where those business models still encourage electric utilities to build large capital intensive plants, and they disincentivize energy efficiency and renewables, and help the consumer and businesses save and conserve energy. That has to be addressed as well. And for researchers like at the MIT, building materials, hydrogen, that what Podesta mentioned on the technology transfer and deployment, we have got to help share the technological advancements with the developing world, because that's going to be critical to helping meet coming anywhere close to the 2050 targets. So we're counting on you, everyone there at MIT and the research universities across America. And then policymakers, we will be there with greater investments if you will help us.
Thank you. Well, all good things must come to an end. I want to thank John Deutsch for organizing and moderating this symposium, and of course, many thanks to Todd and to John and to Representative Casta, because I know you're very busy, especially now after the election, and we really appreciate your joining us here today. Not only does this bring us to the end of Symposium number 6, this brings us to the end of the Climate Action Symposium series that was first initiated by President Reif in October 2018. It's not a year ago, John, it's 2 years ago that we started on this. Of course, it was temporarily delayed. 2 of our final symposia were delayed because of COVID, and they were moved online in the last month. The Climate Action Symposia series has aimed to advance our community's understanding and expand our capacity to generate solutions for the urgent global challenge of climate change. The first symposium examined recent developments in climate science and future opportunities to expand further our understanding of the science of climate change. The second symposium explored the challenges of designing and implementing sound policies to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and promote adaptation, including an active debate about pricing carbon emissions. The next 2 symposia went on to examine a variety of technologies that can contribute to fully decarbonizing the electricity sector, and I agree, more challenging, decarbonizing the rest of the economy, partially by electrifying transportation, buildings, and some industrial applications using carbon-free electricity, but also relying on energy efficiency, carbon capture and sequestration, carbon-free fuels, like green hydrogen, for example. But we have to attack the other sectors. We can't just focus on the electricity sector. The electricity sector now accounts for only 25% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the US and roughly 25% globally. So additional focus on the other sectors is very, very, very important. Last month's symposium, the 5th symposium, focused on the role of research universities. John Deutsch was one of the speakers. What our role is in supporting decarbonization and looking at the progress of the MIT campus plan for reducing our own greenhouse gas footprint. Finally, today we look to the future, to the urgent need to take more aggressive steps to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and enable adaptation, as well as the various policy options that we have to accelerate progress toward global decarbonization and adaptation. This symposium series has also served as an opportunity to take stock of what has been accomplished during the first 5 years of the MIT Plan for Climate Action. What we've learned will provide valuable insights for the next iteration of the MIT Plan for Climate Action. For many months, Vice President for Research, Maria Zuber, and the Climate Action Advisory Committee have been considering our progress and collecting ideas for how MIT can intensify its efforts. As President Reif pointed out, one of the most promising of these ideas is already underway, the new Climate Grand Challenges program. It's proceeding. It will culminate in a set of exciting research projects directed at solving the toughest challenges of climate change. And if you're not familiar with the Climate Grand Challenges program, you can go to Climate Grand Challenges, one word, .mit.edu and read all about it. As the series comes to a close, there are a number of people I'd like to thank. I want to thank President Raphael Reif for his leadership on climate research, education, and dissemination by MIT, so that our expertise in science, engineering, social science, and the humanities can be applied effectively to solve the climate crisis. MIT is not just a science and engineering school, and we've tried to engage the social scientists, the economists, political scientists, as well as those in the humanities to contribute to this effort. I want to thank the members of the Climate Action Symposium Organizing Committee and the moderators and panelists in our 6 symposia for their very hard work and excellent presentations. Working with these people was especially pleasurable for me. I got to meet many people I wouldn't otherwise have known at MIT and obtained a great understanding and respect to the work that they're doing. Behind the scenes, there are literally dozens of people who worked on every aspect of planning, production, and communications for these symposia. I can't thank them all by name, but I do want to extend special thanks to Jim Gomes and Corey Schenk from the Office of Vice President for Research, and to Emily Dahl and Kelly Horty from the MIT Energy Initiative for all their efforts to make sure that everything went off without a hitch. And finally, most of all, I want to thank all of you, the many thousands of members of the MIT community and beyond who've attended these symposia, asked questions, and supported MIT's efforts to help the world to resolve the problems created by climate change. All of us in this community have a stake in this work and a great deal to contribute. And I look forward to making progress with you in the months and years to come. So thank you all. Good evening. Stay safe. Keep up the good work. Bye-bye.